Hey, what's up? Andrew Kramer here, and welcome to another very exciting optical flares tutorial. Today we're going to be taking a look at creating this light array, or the optical flares light show. So let's take a quick look. Okay, so we have this big array of lights, and if I hit Control Shift H or Apple Shift H, you can actually see all of the lights in the scene that make it very difficult to work. So we hit Control Shift H and we can hide them. But the basic idea is to create this massive scene, and we just created some 3D looking text with a couple of copies of a single layer, and should be a lot of fun. So let's go ahead and create a new composition. So we'll choose New Comp. We'll do 960 by 540, and we'll go 23.976, 200 frames long, and we'll hit OK. What I like about doing the tutorials for the DVD rather than the website is that there's not as much pressure, it seems. I mean, you've already bought the product. What are you going to do? Just kidding. These are even better than the ones online. First thing I need to do is create a solid. So we'll make a white solid. And we'll take a mask, and what we want to draw is a semicircle that we're going to basically use as our guide for positioning our lights. So that should work pretty well. We'll make it 3D, then we'll create a light, a point light, 100% intensity, don't cast shadows, and make sure it's white. We'll hit OK. And we'll move the light here in the middle, and what we need to do is duplicate the light, like a zillion times. I think that previous comp there's like 300 lights, so it can be pretty intense. And if you're running optical flares with the GPU supported card, it's going to render much faster. Otherwise, you want to probably work at half resolution or something like that. So keep that in mind. So we've got our light. Let's go ahead and duplicate it into a line. So we'll move it up here. We'll hit Control D, and we'll move it down. And depending on how dense you want this, you can play around with this, but we'll keep it somewhat spread out. And after you create a couple of them, we can hold down Shift, select them, Control D, and offset them so that we can do this a little bit quicker. So once we have a line of these lights, let's go ahead and move to the top view. And so here's our layer, and here is our light, or our row, or our column of lights. And we'll go ahead and take this white solid that we created, and let's rotate it so that we can see this arc in the top view. And then we'll take all of our lights, hold down Shift, select them, and we'll move it along this arc. So then what we're going to do is duplicate it, and all of those lights get duplicated, and then we can move another column over. So if we were to look at this in the active view, you can see now we have two columns. And so basically what you want to do is duplicate it until you've created a semicircle. So we'll hit Control D, move these along. And again, how dense you want it is up to you, but we're going to just play it by ear here. And I'm kind of spacing them out a little bit further towards the edges, but you don't have to. And then again, we'll just move it over here. Hit Control D. And there's going to be so much going on that, if it's not perfect, that's okay. We just want to get a basic shape here. And one more, just for the edge here. We might just do one more on the other side as well. Okay, so we've created an array. We'll go back to the active camera. We've got tons of lights here. We can go ahead and delete this helper layer. That's at the bottom. Now another thing I want to do is select all of the light layers, hold down Shift, and click on this Shy button. And then if we click this button in the comp, it will hide all the lights without actually deleting them. Now I want to create a new camera, and we'll make it 24 millimeter. We'll hit OK. We'll create our text, so we'll just take the text tool and we'll type optical flares light show. And then I'll hit Control-Shift-H to hide all that. Now most plugins don't like to work with the native text, so let's go ahead, select our text layer, and we'll go ahead and pre-compose it, and we'll call this title. We'll hit OK. We'll make it 3D, and we'll go back to that top view, and I want to move it out just so it's in front of the lights. Then we'll go back to the active camera, and we'll hit AA because the lights are behind it and we can no longer see it. So we'll set it to accept lights off. And so there we go. Now let's go and hide our lights. So I'll hit Control-Shift-H. Now we'll take our title and we're going to fill it, generate fill with a black color. And then we'll duplicate it. And we'll take the bottom copy and we'll fill it with a gold color. And we want to move it back in Z space. So if we hit P, bring up the position, and we just want to push it back just a slight bit. So see that? It almost makes it look three-dimensional. And if we orbit the camera here, we can just move it back just a touch. I'll go back to full res here. And I may even move it down. So that looks good. Then we'll take the top copy that's still black and we'll duplicate it. We'll put it down at the very bottom. We'll hit P, and we want to push this one back even further. So now we have sort of a highlight, and we'll duplicate that one once again and back it up just so we have a nice thick looking title. So that looks good. We have our main title here, and those ones are connected. So far so good. Now let's create some optical flares. So we'll choose Layer, New Solid, and we'll do OF, and we'll hit OK. We'll choose Effect, Video Copilot, Optical Flares, and we have the default flare. Now before we change it to position the lights on the track light mode, let's go into the options, clear the default lens flare, come over here to the edge, just click on lens objects, and we're just going to add a glow. Now the thing about using a lot of lights in your scene is you want your flare to be simple. One, so it will render relatively fast, but also you don't want to have a bunch of things everywhere and make it look really messy and sloppy. So we'll start with a glow, and we can maybe add some things as we go. So we'll hit OK, and we'll change the position mode to track lights. And bam, that's a lot of light. So what we need to do is lower the scale. There we go. And possibly the brightness, maybe to 50. We can maybe go a little higher than that, 80% or something. 90. So we've gotten, pretty close to what we're going to be ending up with. So I probably want to go into the options and change the flare color to more of a gold color. We can change it right here in the color mode, but the more times you can change it in just the flare, the better blending is going to happen. So again, let's lower the brightness here. So by default, optical flares composites it on a black background, which means there's no transparency, but we can switch it to on transparent, and we would be able to see anything that's behind it. But I actually like to keep it on black, hit F4, toggle our switches, and change the transfer mode to screen. And that way you can kind of see through it, and that works out a little bit better. Now the other thing I want to do is add some animation. So let's go to the flicker category here. Let's turn up the speed to maybe 30, and we want to turn the amount up. And as we do that, you can see we have this random light going on, and it's based on optical flares sort of randomizing all of the light. So if we shut off the randomized multiple, we're not going to get that same effect. So we keep that on, and we'll get this cool kind of animation. Now next I want to create our actual light sources, like the light bulbs. So what I'll do is I'll duplicate optical flares, edit, duplicate. We'll shut the top one off, and we'll move one down to the bottom. We'll go into the options, and instead of using a glow, we'll delete that. Come over here, we're going to add an iris. So we'll just click on that. Now an iris is already set to be at 200 distance, and that means it's basically away from the light source. So we need to set that to 0. And I'll delete that glow. So here is our iris. We'll come down here. Instead of using a polygon, we're going to use a texture. And we'll click on the texture image here, and that allows us to pick one of the textures from optical flares. You can also load in your own from a custom layer. So we'll scroll down, and we'll choose the light dome. Click on it, and we'll hit OK. Now we'll turn up the brightness of the element. The reason we're going to use optical flares to basically render a texture is so that we don't have to go and position one on every single light. Optical flares will do it automatically. Now I do want to shut off this flicker since we're not going to be using it. So we'll shut those two values down to 0. And we'll turn the scale up on these lights. Maybe the brightness as well. So you're probably thinking to yourself, Andrew, you did a pretty bad job of positioning these lights, but that's okay. You guys will work harder than me, I'm sure. So now we have our lights composited on top of our little light sources, and it's looking pretty good. So let's duplicate optical flares again, and let's put it below the title. Now things are getting a little bit bright here, so we're probably going to want to change some of the settings. So I'm going to bring the brightness down to about 50. One other thing that I like to do is our glow is very realistic, has a natural fall off, but that can sometimes be a bit bright. So if we click on the glow, let's turn the gamma down to about 0.6, and that way the glow will stay inside of a smaller area. So if we turn the brightness back up here, you can see it's a little bit more controlled, and that might be good for this background element. Now we have the top one here, which we'll turn back on, and we also want to make sure that this one isn't too bright. So we'll turn this down to maybe 60, and we also want to make sure it gets obscured by our 3D title because we can see the lens flares on top. So let's take a look at that by itself. So I have my top layer here. Let's go into the foreground layer. So this is where you designate something that's in the foreground. So it could be a 2D matte, or it could be a 3D layer. So in this case, I want to use the main title layer. So we'll choose the main title layer, and we have a light radius. So right now, in some cases, the light is small, but it's actually over top the solid area of the title, and that's because the light radius is a little bit high. So let's set that to 1, and that'll make sure that anything behind the solid part of the text gets obscured. So we'll go into the options here. I may want to do the same thing to the glow, 0.7 or so. And we'll hit OK, and we'll turn the brightness up on these. So a lot of playing around, but at the end of it, you're going to have something that looks really cool. So we'll back out here. Now our lights in the background look good, but the foreground lights don't look quite as intense. Okay, so this is looking good, but let's play around with the color of the flare. So we'll start with the background flares here, and maybe we will add a little bit of warmth in the color. So that looks good. And then our foreground flares, possibly a little bit of warmth as well. Now, one thing I'm seeing about this design is that it's not blowing out the title as much as I want it to. So let's turn the brightness down maybe to about 50 and turn the scale up to about 50. So that will make the colors and the light bleed out around everything a little bit more. So let's refine this, maybe 40 and You know, this is looking pretty good. Now, the other thing we can do is add a little bit of a camera move. So we'll go down to the camera here. We'll hit P. We'll keyframe the position. And we'll take the orbit camera tool and sort of orbit over here a little bit. We might even want to move closer. And I do want to be down low looking up at all of this. And the other thing too is I want to make sure that my camera, the anchor point is lined up with the title. So this is the title, these are our lights. And you can also see that Optical Flares renders in the top view, which is kind of a cool feature. So that's looking pretty good. I probably want to bring the position of interest down a little bit. But we do want to be looking up at our title somewhat. So let's move our title down. All right. So far, so good. So we'll go ahead and animate the position of the camera. We'll move forward here. And we'll take, again, the orbit tool. And we'll just click and drag as we sort of orbit around this big light array. So this is looking pretty cool. Again, you play around with these lighting effects. You can always add a little bit of a color correction on top of it too, just to make it pop a little bit more. I may add one to the background flares. Now I may want to add some more detail to the top layer optical flare. So we'll go into the options and let's add a streak. And we'll rotate that streak 90 degrees, so it's sort of an up and down streak. Now we do want to scale it down a lot and bring the brightness down because it will multiply. So we hit OK, and you know, it looks pretty good. I might brighten it up just a little bit more, so we'll brighten it, and we might even stretch it out a little bit so it's a little wider. We'll hit OK. So it's looking good. Play around with the colors. You know, the less saturated, the more, you know, natural, more realistic it may look. Maybe instead of a fill, we could add a gradient or a ramp. And we'll set it to a radial ramp. We'll use maybe like a dark red with a black. And Control-Shift-H so we can see the handles of this. And that's looking pretty cool. I think our highlight layer has gotten a little too far away, so let's bring that back closer to our title so that it's just a little bit of a highlight and not so big. But this is looking good. I think we probably need to go into our main title and scale it up. And then we'll come back and then scale our title layer down some. So we don't want it to start getting pixelated since we're no longer using, you know, vector artwork in a sense since we pre-composed it. So I'll go ahead and create a new solid, and we'll choose OK, and we'll select it. We'll choose Effect, Simulation, Particle World, and we'll solo the layer maybe with the title just for reference. We'll set the grid to off. We'll change the particle type to a tri-polygon. We'll go into the options, go into rendering, turn on force motion blur, which will give us some motion blur. We'll hit OK, then OK. And we want to make this a really large producer area. So we'll scale the producer area out, X, Y, Z. Probably go into the physics, set this to maybe twirly, and we'll move the position of the actual particle system up so that we only see the particles that are falling into the view. And maybe the birth rate a little higher. Might even turn the size of the particles down, so we just have the control here. And we'll lower the gravity, increase the life, the longevity. We'll hit that to 2. I think the velocity of the twirl is a little high, so we'll turn that down. The gravity also seems a little too fast. All right, that's looking a little bit better, like some confetti or something. We'll set this to add. We'll turn everything back on. And now we have this, kind of incredible scene. We'll maybe turn these particles down again. Looking a little large. The smaller they are, I think, the scale, the reference in your mind, it'll seem like everything is a lot bigger, because if the particles are that small, the scene must be huge. Now, we can see that our two layers aren't holding up quite so well. So what I did in the original examples, I just made more copies and I kept them closer together. So feel free just to go in there, duplicate a few more copies, and then move them over to get a little bit more filled in result. But I can go and preview this really quick and we'll see what we have. Okay, and a little more camera movement, and we're in business. Now, one of the cool things about this technique of putting additional copies on top as well as behind is without the behind copy, one, we won't be able to read it very well if we were to shut it off, but it also creates the sense of actual volumetric light, because the light behind it would still be lighting up the area, and having the two copies allows you to put something behind it and then also having the light come on top of your design. Now, we might want to play around with adding the other layers into the foreground slot so that they'll get obscured properly. But it could also be, a reflection that's causing it to gleam on the side of it. So I figured it would probably be okay, and it should render a little bit faster if you don't have all 5 of your foreground slots filled up. Anyway, I am Andrew Kramer. Hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I'm off to dinner. I don't know where I'm going to go, but hopefully somewhere good. See you later.